Hey, Al.
Hey, Miles.
Hey, hey, Miles.
So everybody.
Right. Miles, I just resent you a link. I had a panic. I was like, I'm sure I sent it so you could delete it, but um, just want to make sure.
Awesome. Thank you for double checking on me.
Yeah.
How's it going today, Miles?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm good. Just running through the PowerPoint one more time, and I'll go ahead and get the screen share going. Is that working okay?
It looks great. And now it's in slideshow mode and looks even better.
Perfect. Just get set up here. Awesome. All right. Well, for those of you who have joined early, thank you so much for being here early and joining us. We'll get started and start the recording right at noon. All right. Well, should we
Okay.
go ahead and
Well,
get started?
yeah, high noon. Should we go ahead and get started? Mel, you want me to kick things off?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for everyone who's joining us. It looks like we have a few more folks coming into our Zoom. This is the November 6th zoning code update webinar for the mixed use zone. That's zone B3, B4, and R3C. And on the next slide, you'll see our agenda for today, and we'll run through that before we do some introductions. So we're going to start with big picture, spend about 15 minutes just sharing why we're updating the zoning code, how we're going about it, and what we hope to achieve. From there, we're going to dive into some more details on what potential changes are being considered at this early stage in the process. we do, for all of the folks joining today, want to reserve as much time as possible, at least 20 minutes or so towards the end for Q&A. And there will be a follow-up survey that we send out along with this recording after the meeting. I also want to draw everybody's attention to the link at the top of the page at menti.com and the code. That code will stay up there throughout the presentation. So some of our interactive polling, you can open a new browser, or you can scan the QR code here on your phone, and it'll allow you to follow along with some polling. There's also a Q&A feature on the command taskbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you can use that Q&A to type in questions as we go, and we'll get to those questions during the Q&A function today. So we want this to be a highly interactive webinar, and I will then start by introducing myself and the team. I'm Miles Graham, fortunate enough to be facilitating a number of the Crested Butte Community Compass meetings like this, and I'm joined by town staff, and I'll flip it over to Mel.
Great, thanks, Miles. I'm Mel Yema, Community Development Director, and I'll turn it over to Jesse.
I'm Jessie Early. I'm the senior planner here with the town of Crested Butte.
Dara McDonald, town manager.
And my name is Caitlin Archambault. My camera does not work, but I'm here and excited to get started with you all.
All right, thanks all. So we've got our first icebreaker coming up next with the Menti. Hopefully this allowed you all to get the Mentimeter set up. But we want to know, in a single word, what do you love most about your zone district, or really just your neighborhood here in town? And there should be a function that allows you to easily type in. Some of these open-ended questions can be a little more challenging. A lot of the themes we've heard to date, we hear a lot about location, and just the fantastic community and the people and the neighbors have been common themes for this question so far. And if you are having any trouble with the Mentimeter function, you can also use that Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom command center. And that Q&A function is easy to use too if you're having any trouble with the Mentimeter. So feel free to use one or the other or both here. Looks like we're not seeing anything coming in yet. It looks like there's one person online who's gotten into the Menti. And in the interest of time, because we do have a lot to cover, feel free to use that Q&A function if it's easier, and share what you love most about your neighborhood. But Mel, what do you think? Should we dive straight into it?
Yeah, let's keep going. Depends on the webinar if people love the Menti or not. But as Miles mentioned, that code will always be up on the top of the screen, so feel free to go there and enter as we go along. So let's start with the big picture. Why are we updating the zoning code, and how are we going about it? So a lot of us, we love Crested Butte and its small town charm and our sense of community. But we have a lot of challenges. A lot of change has been happening, is still happening to us. And for a long time, we've been reacting incrementally. A lot of growth is happening to us and around us. We're landlocked to the town itself and limited in development potential. And that high demand and that limit has really led to a big imbalance in our market, where the free market is catering much more to amenities, tourism, luxury. Think of the high-end restaurant, the high-end single-family home, the high-end boutique hotel, where those community needs like affordable housing that's attainable to the local workforce, childcare, nonprofits, those sorts of things have been subsidized by the public sector for a long time now, which the town has been doing for quite a long time now. And a lot of these challenges have resulted in our livability and affordability starting to erode. So now's the time to really be more proactive and identify and work towards the future our community wants. How can we guide growth to better meet community needs? How can we be really strategic about the remaining development potential in Crested Butte? And how can we try to bring some balance back into the market through a mix of regulations and incentives? And in general, how do we make our zoning code much clearer, easier to use and understand, and better aligned with our community values, as our code in general, as in any community, should really be a reflection of what that community's values are. So we didn't just start this overnight and say, hey, let's update our zoning code. It actually, I don't think we've ever really done a whole scale update to it. We've just, since I think the 70s when it was enacted, have incrementally amended it over time. So we knew going into it, this is going to be a process. It's going to take a lot of work and commitment to really do this well with the community. So going back to how we want our code to really be a reflection of our community's values, we started back in 2021 with the community compass. Say, hey, we're having these challenges. Let's really start up here at this 10,000 foot level to come together as a community to really understand what are our shared values and goals as a community. From there, how can we get more specific within those goals? What is our vision? What are our plans and strategies when it comes to our goals around transportation mobility, around climate action, around historic preservation, and around the community plan, which is more of our land use vision for the town? And then let those visions and plans guide our actual regulations and programs from our zoning code, like we're doing now, our building code, our housing strategy, our sustainability program. And then all those things influence what you really see on the ground, the new housing development happening, the new park being redeveloped, a new infrastructure project. We want all of those to really tie back to those community goals and values. So that's what we've been in the process of. So hopefully you've heard about the community plan, the community compass. And if not, it's definitely not too late. But through a lot of community participation and conversations from 2021 to 2022, we identified 4 key values for the Crested Butte community and 7 strategic goals for the town council to focus on for the next 5 years. So Crested Butte's an authentic, connected, accountable, and bold community. And these are the 7 goals that have really been guiding our town council in their actions and their decisions, in their policies, and their budget since the compass was adopted in 2022. But a lot of these goals are really interconnected, but they can also really conflict in a lot of ways. So with the zoning code and the community plan in particular, we really looked at that interplay between accommodate growth in a way that maintains our rural feel while enabling people who live and work here to thrive. There could be some great synergies there, but could be a lot of conflicts there. So we went into the community plan to really dive deeper into that. The community plan then went deeper to look at essentially our future land use vision, and with the goal of improving the livability, functionality, and sense of community in Crested Butte by looking at how could we leverage our development regulations to thoughtfully guide more free market investment in community serving housing and spaces for businesses and nonprofits. So it wasn't our new 5-year housing plan, we're going to build this community housing. It was all about looking how can we leverage our regulations to have the free market be a better partner in addressing these challenges. So it had 2 primary objectives. How do we expand, diversify, and distribute community serving housing? This is something the town's been in the business of doing for a long time now, more than 3 decades of really trying to distribute housing in different ways across town. Think of all the ADUs in different neighborhoods across town. Think of different deed restrictions and housing programs. But how can we really fine tune that to continue to do that, as we know housing is still a challenge? But the community plan also introduced more of a new objective around facilitating, creating, and preserving community serving spaces. The affordability pie of our cost of living, it has to do with housing, it has to do with transportation, but it also has to do with access to those everyday goods and services that we need to function as a community. Is there an affordable place to grab a bite to eat or some groceries? Is childcare accessible and affordable? Do you have access to the trades and plumbers and electricians when something goes wrong? What are those things and those community spaces that really make up our cost of living pie and our functionality as a community? And what role could the town play in helping with those challenges? So the plan identified a general vision and recommended different tools across different areas of town as far as what might we think about leveraging and looking at in our zoning code in different ways in different areas of town to try to give some incentives or flexibility in exchange for those needs of community serving housing and community serving spaces. So it looked at different areas from the neighborhoods to Bellevue to Sixth Street, knowing it's not a one size fits all approach. All of our different areas and neighborhoods are unique. So we'll get more into the details around the mixed use zones that we're talking about today of what that looks like. But as you can see, there wasn't a lot of focus on really changing the look and feel of the downtown historic core of Elk Avenue and of these zones surrounding it. So we'll dive into some of the nuances that we're looking at with this code update. So now we need to implement. The community plan identified the vision and recommended the tools, but now we need to make it happen. So we're looking at that through our zoning code update. We need to enable that vision to happen. Is it actually possible to achieve that? Do we allow it in our regulatory framework? But then we're also going to create a new housing strategy and a community spaces strategy, and think of those as the complementary programs, projects, financial incentives that could really complement our code to really implement the vision. At the same time, right before the community plan, we developed our first ever historic preservation plan, which identified calling for different ways to look at our design standards across town and how do we really continue to thoughtfully preserve our history, but also recognize that our history has evolved and changed over time, and we've been kind of freezing our history in our mining era of our history. So that's also leading to an update on our design standards that will go hand in hand with our zoning code, and we'll set the stage for what that's going to look like today and how to participate in that as well. So to update the code itself, since the community plan was adopted in July, we've done a lot of internal review and preparation and BOZAR work sessions to really look at our existing code. What could be cleaned up? What's maybe inconsistent? What are maybe some definitions or things that are outdated? How can we start to improve that framework? And then also a lot of BOZAR work sessions to look at how could we improve our processes? What's been working well? What hasn't been working well? Now we're in this outreach phase of going zone by zone to really hear from you all, present. Here's our first draft of considerations based on the community plan, based on the preservation plan and all of these other plans. And let's get your feedback. And no, it's just the first draft. There will be many more to come. If you participated in the Compass or the community plan, you might know we rewrote the Compass 7 times. The community plan was twice. So there will be many drafts to get the code right. And it won't be perfect either. There is always opportunity to amend and improve over time, just as we have done with our current code. And then later this winter, we'll do a lot more refined community outreach. As more drafts are presented, we'll get more feedback from you to get it to a place towards adoption. So we want to hear from you all. If you're on the Menti, what are your preferred ways to engage in the code update? Is it things like this, like webinars and surveys? Do you prefer to have more open houses or come to council or BOZAR meetings, or can we get more creative? Do you want us to come to you and meet with you in your zone on your block? We heard that from some other folks, which we're very much happy to do. Are there other ideas of ways we can get folks to engage?
And Mel, it looks like we've got 2 folks on the mini, so I'm going to give another shout out to that little icon at the top of our page, menti.com, and the code. You can sign on anytime for that one, or you can use the Q&A function, and it looks like we've got one question in there already.
Awesome. Thank you for the response there. All right, well, let's keep moving for the sake of time here. So now what's guiding this process? As we said, we're not starting overnight. We have the community compass. We have all those subsequent plans. So earlier in October, we had a joint work session with Council and BOZAR to really say, okay, based on combining all these plans together, what are our key guiding strategies for the code update? And here was the first draft of what we came up with. First, can we simplify the code and our development review processes? How can we make sure they're really clear, consistent, a reflection of our values, and that the process is easy to engage with and understand? How can we retain our small town feel, both the scale and feel of our neighborhoods, but also that small town living where we know our neighbors and we have that tight-knit sense of community? looking at how to strengthen historic preservation, knowing how the approach to historic preservation is going to be a little different based on the historic preservation plan, which we'll talk about, but how can we make sure we really strengthen those tools and don't lose all that incredible work we've put into it. Fourth, integrating land use with transportation and climate action. How can we, through our regulatory framework, encourage more development where people can live closer to where they work, reducing vehicle miles traveled, reducing their impacts on transportation and emissions and things like that, and which also contributes to that sense of community. And then lastly, link zoning to community benefits. Looking at all those different incentives and different areas identified in the community plan, can we give some flexibility, give some incentives in exchange for those community benefits of community serving housing or community serving commercial spaces? So which of these strategies are most important to you? I know we're just introducing them, but we'd love to hear, are there some that are standing out to you right now? You're welcome to click, I need more time to think about this. This will also be in the survey, so you can definitely think on it or change your mind, but we just want to hear kind of your first reaction. Do any of these strategies resonate with you?
And it looks like we've got some early returns on simplifying the code, linking zoning to community benefit. And it does look like we've got a few more folks joining into the Menti here. So we'll give you another second. And Mel, I wanted to just call out from Mindy on the last poll, meeting in the neighborhood was a preference for some of that outreach that we had on our last poll. And it looks like we've got a couple more responses coming in on retaining the small town feel, really bumping up there, and strengthening historic preservation.
So thank you all. And yeah, meeting in the neighborhood, I think, is such a great idea. So we will definitely look at incorporating that into the process. All right, so I've done a lot of talking. So let's turn it over to Jesse to dive into the details. Oh, whoops. Sorry, I think we're missing a poll slide, but that's okay.
It's all good. I can hop right in. One of the questions that Mel was going to ask is how familiar some of you are with zoning. I'm seeing some names on here, so I know some of you are pretty familiar. I'm just going to give a quick overview of what zoning is, though, just in case some people aren't familiar with what zoning is. So zoning is the way the city or a town divides the land in the town into different areas called zones to control how property can be used and developed within town. And so each zone has its own rules about, and the things that you're seeing on the screen here, the use of that land, the density, so how the buildings fit on there, like floor area ratio, and then the fit as it relates to parking, setbacks, and then the lot measurements and the building measurements. And then there are other regulations that come into play as well, like demolition, floodplain, and those things as well. And the main goal of all those things that come together to make up zoning is to make sure that the land is used in a way that's safe, organized, and supports the community's overall plan for growth. Next slide, please. So as you see, zoning's just one piece, but there are multiple factors in the way we regulate development. And so development is regulated by lots of different factors. One is zoning code, for instance. Another within our community is the design standards. Other examples of this are building codes and subdivision regulations, and those come together in the middle, as you see. And that's what is used to make decisions within our community. And together, these layers shape how the development happens. And so it balances private property rights with public safety and our community's visions. And so the development review processes are evaluated as part of each process. Next slide, please. And so this slide looks very similar to what we just saw on the last slide, but this is just our task in this process, as Mel was saying, is just to update and ensure these processes are easy to understand and more efficient if there are ways to make those more efficient. So for example, could staff review certain projects administratively, whereas today every project goes to the board, and the board being BOZAR, Board of Zoning and Architectural Review, for some type of review. So to help streamline the processes that help meet our community's goals, and then for the projects that are more challenging or that are a little more difficult, those projects maybe then could have a more formal review, for instance.
And just to give some context before we go into the details, any potential changes that are being considered in the code would influence development going forward. So it wouldn't mean I have to now change this to my property. It would influence any new applications or things like that going forward. And Crested Butte is pretty built out, and we do have pretty strong demolition regulations that we'll go over today. So what this map is showing is vacant lots. So any types of changes we're looking at will be pretty slow and incremental, but could have an influence in the long term. So we're not looking at like a drastic change of something, changing a whole block overnight. It would likely be really incremental. And to just put some context, we usually have, I don't know, Jesse, maybe between half a dozen to a dozen new development applications a year, less this year. So it will be very incremental. So let's dive into the B3 zone, which today we're kind of bringing together B3, B4, and R3C. The general intent of all these areas is to support a mix of residential and business uses while preserving its historic structures. And the community plan really didn't look at key changes to the look and feel of this area, recognizing it is a really unique and fun and, that funky Crested Butte mix of business uses with residential and just all those amazing historic structures here. So we really didn't want to come in and propose big changes to that. So some of the focus areas here that we're looking at today is around that simplification, looking at, do we consolidate B3, B4, and R3C? So B3 here and here, B4 here, and R3C, recognizing the intent and uses and provisions are really similar here. And is there an opportunity to streamline and make it clearer? So that's a question, a feedback question that we would love to hear your feedback on. Looking at simplifying our definitions and uses, looking at right sizing parking requirements, and then looking at things like removing minimum lot sizes within floor areas, recognizing that a lot of those minimums really get backed into with requirements after you account for your lot size and your setbacks and your FAR and all those things. Do we need to prescribe the minimum, or can we recognize that a minimum will occur after all of those things? So that's a question we're looking at in the code and that simplification piece. Some other potential changes in the map that we're looking at that I want to explain here is a couple overlay zones for historic preservation. So right now, the full town boundary is our designated local historic district, meaning everything in the town must conform to the town's design standards and guidelines, which right now are all standards around being built to look like it came from the coal mining era. The historic preservation plan calls for a different approach to look at how do we really protect and keep that in our historic core and a buffer around it. And that's what you're seeing in this red outline here, recognizing any buildings within that overlay zone of the mining era period of significance would continue to meet those historic preservation guidelines and standards for being built to look like the mining era and continuing to preserve those structures. It then calls for a new district called the early recreation era of those buildings built when the town transitioned from being a coal mining town into a ski and recreation town, as there's a lot of unique architecture that occurred during that period. So this is more of a salt and pepper district that would be an overlay, and we're currently doing a survey of any buildings built in that period to better understand architectural significance, integrity, to identify what would that district actually look like. So right now, anything that any parcel that's shaded on here means that it's being surveyed for that and eligible to potentially be part of that new district. But that will likely shrink and become less parcels as we do that survey, which is happening right now. But that would be an overlay zone to say if my parcel is in that zone, then I'm going to go to this chapter of the design standards to reflect that period of history. And then outside of those districts, the design standards would look at would look at outside of those two zones, there would be simpler standards around mass, scale, and form, but allow for more flexibility and creativity in different styles of architecture. So I am seeing a clarification question of the different zones. So, and I do apologize, the light blue is a little hard to see. So the B3 zone is here, the 400 and 500 blocks of Elk, and then also here off of 3rd Street. The B4 zone is the 0 block of Elk, and then the R3C zone is currently here on 2nd Street off of Elk Avenue. All right, so I'm going to kick it over. Oh, sorry, that was out of order on the zoning, but we'll skip that. So before we dive into the details of the different code provisions and what this first draft of considerations are, we'd love to hear from you. What challenges are you experiencing in your neighborhood? And some themes we've been hearing so far, and I already see in the Q&A, parking, snow storage are some challenges. We've heard from other folks, affordability is a big challenge in a lot of neighborhoods, but we'd love to hear from you if you're willing to add that in. And you can either put it in the Menti or add it into the question and answer. So parking and snow storage, smoke, trespassing, and customer spillover, recognizing these are those mixed use zones. Overwhelmed by visitor impacts, being right off Elk Avenue, it can get really busy during certain times of year, and mixing residential with commercial. Awesome, thank you. That's really helpful as we go into this. All right, so we are going to run through the different kind of code provisions, and then we will try to breeze through these as fast as we can so we can really get to the Q&A. But as we go, please feel free to type your questions into that Q&A.
Okay, so there are a lot of words on the screen. I'm going to try and do my best to summarize here. Many of the zone districts have a litany of uses, as you can see on the left-hand side right now, like this one. This is multiple zones, again, either permitted or conditional uses. Permitted means that these uses can be done by right with no approval, and conditional means that some level of review is required. For our town, currently, this means BOZAR review of a change of conditional use. One of the movements is to change to dwelling units overall in the update, rather than using terms like duplex, triplex, and multifamily, for instance. So within what you're seeing, again, the left is what's currently in the 3 different zoning codes. Or the zone districts, and what we're proposing are the permitted and conditional uses for this new B3 zone. And so what will be kept will be dwelling units, accessory dwellings, public transit stops, public rec facilities, office uses, retail commercial establishments, and local conserving commercial establishments, and make these permitted uses rather than conditional uses. The other thing that will kind of be cleaned up right now, home occupation is in some zones, not all zones. It will be included as a permitted use within this zone district. Accessory buildings, public transit facilities, public museums, shop crafts, restaurants, funeral parlors, and mortuaries will then be conditional uses. We'll clean up office uses. On the left, you can see quite a list of different office uses. So what we're doing is just kind of morphing those all together to make sure an office use is an office use. And then that will help to be defined probably in the definitions section. And then also assembly uses are called out and not so specific as churches as a conditional use. We'll be adding congregate housing, childcare, restricted food service, and these would be conditional uses within the zone. And then the things that would be removed would be open use recreation sites, understanding that much of this zone, there are just limited spots for development within the zones. There aren't big parcels of land anymore that could be developed anymore. Hospitals, motor vehicle rental rental, repair, and wholesaling, bed and breakfast use, parking areas, public playgrounds, recreation areas, schools, clubs and recreation clubs, and then hotels, motels, and lodges, and fraternities and sororities. So that was a long overview, but just to give you an overview of what's changing there.
And Jesse, we've got a clarification question here real quick. Can you define, and I quote, local serving retail establishments?
I may have Mel hop in. We're still kind of tweaking that definition right now.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It's something that we're exploring of is there a regulatory tool in our land uses um, to go back to those community serving spaces, community serving commercial, and could we think about a definition that's maybe a distinction between a retail type of establishment that serves those everyday needs of the community versus something that's more tourist facing, like on Elk Avenue, of maybe a t-shirt shop or something like that. So that's going to be really tricky to work through. We are currently doing kind of a market analysis right now of our commercial sector of what kind of gaps we have. So that is definitely a work in progress definition and just a first draft of, is this something that could even work? All right. So next is parking. So the zoning code regulates how many off-street parking spaces are required. So off-street means on your own private property. So for example, shown in yellow here in this image, where then there's also public on-street parking in the town right-of-way or on-street parking. So as you can see here in the turquoise on the screen. Right now, off-street parking requirements are dictated by use and are an absolute requirement, saying you must build this many, have this many spaces for this type of use. So for example, with residential, if you have 4 bedrooms or less in a dwelling, you have to have 2 spaces. For retail, you have to have 1 space for 500 square feet of usable space. In this first draft of what's being proposed, we want to explore, could we just have a minimum that's lower to really take the prescription out of the town dictating you have to have this many parking spaces and have it be more on the development, on the market analysis of their own development to say, this is how many spaces I need to become, to really be market feasible and work for my situation or my business or my household. And that is a trend we're seeing across the country. And even in the state of Colorado, for cities or towns over a certain size, the state actually mandates you can't have minimum parking requirements for certain types of development. So in this first draft, we're exploring having that minimum approach instead of absolute. So saying you could, for residential units, you have to have a minimum of 1 space per unit. And looking at for deed restricted residential, do we consider no minimum, knowing you could always build above that, but leverage on street parking? And then with commercial uses, we're not really looking at many changes, but looking at updating the payment in lieu of parking fee, recognizing that fee hasn't been updated in a while and just needs to be looked at and evaluated given current market conditions and current costs of things. And then also looking at, are there opportunities within that payment of lieu to really leverage and consider exemptions for those community serving types of spaces and things like that, because I know payment in lieu is quite a big expense for certain types of developments. So that's something we're exploring there as well.
Okay, as far as lot measurements go, similar to what Mel said earlier, we'd be removing the minimum lot requirement and the minimum lot width requirement. So you can see what's current on the left and what we're proposing on the right. We would leave the maximum at 7,250, which mirrors the R3C zone currently. And so that is important for floor area ratio calculation perspective, which I'll explain in a few slides. But next slide. So regarding setbacks, the front yard setback would remain at 0 feet, which is relational to the current requirements, which all 3 zones have a 0-foot requirement right now. Side yard setbacks, there basically would be no change other than the fact that flat roofed buildings would be allowed to be at 0 feet rather than 3 feet as identified in the B3 and B4 zones. Because that's more consistent with most of the other commercial zone districts. Also, there'd be an allowance to allow mechanical equipment within the setbacks. We've been seeing sometimes it's a challenge to get them on the right side of the building under an area which doesn't shed. And so this is just one thing we're suggesting to kind of remedy that problem. Rear yard setbacks, instead of being 10 feet for a primary, 5 feet for an accessory, we would move to be 5 feet for all buildings. We have some random situations where buildings have a rear yard setback, which functions almost like a side yard setback. If we have those situations, we would look to have those function like a side yard setback. So if there's a roof shedding into that area, it would need to meet that 7.5 feet to 11.5 feet.
All right, so in the current code right now, in every zone district, there's kind of a catch-all section called additional provisions of what are some certain requirements in there that maybe don't fit in those other typical provisions. Right now in B3, B4, and R3C, there's different specific provisions around roof forms, wall height, stream margin review, like our floodplain review, for uses that are in the floodplain. And what we want to look at to simplify is really looking at those design sorts of things to not be in the zoning code, but rather be really clear in the design standards. So having any sort of design provisions live there instead of in the zoning code. And then for stream margin review, instead of being embedded within individual zones, looking kind of like the historic districts of an overlay zone for floodplain for any projects. If you're in that overlay, then you would be required to go through the floodplain permit process.
Okay, so FAR or floor area ratio is the way to measure how much building can be constructed on a piece of land, and is basically the ratio of the building's mass or volume to the lot size. We are combining the three zones as we described on the left, to make this new B3 zone. So we're looking to clean up the requirements. There are ranges currently in the code which are not used. Most people go for the maximum within that range. The maximum FAR is proposed to be 0.5 or 3,500 square feet for all buildings, and sometimes the square footage comes up if there is a larger lot size, for instance. We'd also look to remove the requirement for the minimum unit size and defer to the IBC definition. And then relating to building measurements, the height is 30 feet for the existing B3 and B4 zones and 28 feet for the R3C zone. We are proposing to have the maximum height be at 28 feet, as many of the buildings within this zone are historic and exist much less than 28 feet. So they would be grandfathered. There are on the other hand, there are buildings like, for instance, Scarpridge Lodge or Slogar, which might exist above 28 feet, and they would be grandfathered just as they are.
So on to incentives. If you've read the community plan or attended some of the other code webinars so far, we're looking at considerations of different incentives in different areas of town in exchange for community serving housing or commercial. So for example, last week we had the high density residential zone incentive, and we looked at, hey, could we consider allowing up to the maximum of the FAR range and 5 additional feet in height from 30 to 35 feet in exchange for a higher percentage of deed restricted housing. In this area, knowing it is such a key part of our historic district, it's very built out, it has so many historic buildings, we really didn't look at any regulatory incentives to drastically look at potentially changing the character here, knowing it's a small area, it's functioning really well, and it's such a big part of that charm. But in the historic preservation plan, it called for looking at a historic building stabilization and maintenance incentive program, which is something we currently have in our priorities to develop a draft program next year, to really help facilitate rehabilitation of historic outbuildings or things like that, knowing it's it's costly to maintain and rehabilitate historic structures. And one idea that we had for this zone is there's so many unique outbuildings and sheds and things. Could we look at a potential thing with that program where could there be specific financial incentives there to rehabilitate outbuildings into accessory dwelling units and or accessory buildings to be used as small scale commercial space, maybe an office or a like an office that's publicly available, not like a home occupation office or like a small scale retail shop or something like that. So that's an idea we're interested in exploring with that incentive to really connect the preservation plan with the community plan, but something we'd love your feedback on.
So regarding demolition, our demolition ordinance, which was put into place in 2019, would be strengthened and kept and strengthened in the language that's already there. This ordinance basically requires that a building, if approved for demolition or relocation, and say it exists at less than the maximum FAR, to reach the maximum FAR with the redevelopment plan, an accessory dwelling unit would need to be required as part of the redevelopment plan. There will be a section that pertains to buildings from the new period of significance that Mel referred to earlier, and also just looking to create incentives, as Mel mentioned, for stabilization and maintenance of these buildings rather than just seeing them kind of fall into disrepair. Next slide, please. And then, as Mel mentioned earlier, just a quick plug for November 18th, we'll be kicking off the design standards update process. We're very excited about that. Again, we have our current period of significance, which represents coal mining. We're looking at that new period of significance and currently surveying the buildings from that period, and we'll have more information as to which buildings contribute to that probably early next year. And then looking at design standards outside of those two periods of significance relating to mass scale, form, and orientation, basically.
So that was a lot. So I know that this is a lot of information to take in. So please take your time to consider these considerations. Again, it's very much just the first draft. We do on our website, we'll be posting the recording of this webinar, and then we do have a fact sheet on there of just a sheet with all these same slides of that first draft of proposed considerations. And then we have an open feedback survey until December 19th on the website too, where you can give as specific or as general feedback as you'd like. And then of course, please reach out to us, and we're happy to meet with you. We're happy to talk on the phone. We're happy to answer more specific questions or hear other feedback that you have, because this is complex stuff and it's going to take some time and a lot of feedback and working together to work through it. But for now, I'll turn it over to Miles for Q&A.
Thanks, Mel. And we've got a lot of good questions in the Q&A function. If you'd like to ask your question, you can raise your virtual hand. There's a button at the bottom of your Zoom tab there to ask a question. We'll unmute you, but let's start with what we've got online. And it looks like our first question is coming in from Mindy, and it does a great job of connecting affordability with transportation. And one of the values that Mel pointed out is this process is intended to integrate the land use with the climate action and transportation plan. And certainly some of the values in the community plan on community serving housing and community spaces connect people with their jobs and their housing with less requirements for transportation, which connects to affordability as well. But Mel, I don't know if you'd add anything else on that question.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And sometimes if you choose to live maybe farther from where you work, or if you can't afford to live near where you work, or there isn't housing available, that transportation piece of your cost of living pie can be high when it comes to having to have a car, having to maintain that car, having to buy gas to commute. Of course, we are really fortunate here with an amazing free public transportation system that's really frequent and really accessible, but it's not accessible to everyone depending on where you live outside of the town. You might be too far from an RTA stop. So depending on your situation, transportation could be a piece of that affordability pie, and providing more opportunities for folks to live closer to where they work is just one way to reduce that piece of the spending pie.
Mel, thank you so much. And I don't see any virtual hands up, so I'm just going to keep going down our open questions. One more from Mindy is, where's the vision or thoughts to have public recreation trail access in these zones and public transit stops?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think there's really a specific vision or project or idea there yet, but looking at recognizing as we continue to evaluate our public transportation systems in those commercial and mixed use zones, how do we not preclude the possibility of a bus stop or a shelter or something like that in the future? And then same with public recreation trails. We really have a lot of our beloved pedestrian bridges and those areas through these areas. So how can we also just not preclude, is there opportunity there too, with potentially opportunities for voluntary easements or things if there is desire to have more pedestrian connectivity trails through the town?
Excellent, Mel. Thank you so much. And I'm still not seeing any virtual hands up, so we'll keep going. This next question is from an anonymous attendee, and it was a follow-up on our definition for local serving retail establishments. And so I think there's some interest to clarify some of our definitions, as the team has pointed out today. This is early on in this process, and the proposed changes are all working drafts. So making sure that we're clear in some of those definitions. The comment was, sounds like local serving retail establishments could be a spin on food service. So I think those definitions are going to be important as we move through this process.
Yeah, exactly how you said it, Miles. But one thing with this area in particular is we really kept that at retail, recognizing with the mixed use and the challenges we heard from you of mixing residential with commercial, we would really be looking to keep restaurant food uses as conditional. So there could be certain conditions on hours of operation and things like that, knowing it's a mixed use zone.
Well, thank you so much for that clarification. One more clarification on terminology. The comment is, please clarify dwellings, and it appears that there could be unintended consequences related to higher density buildouts.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot in a lot of more modern land use codes that they've moved away from things like single family, duplex, triplex to more dwellings, detached or attached. So that's something we're exploring here, but recognizing we still have FAR limits, we still have setbacks, we still have height. So a question is, could we be less prescriptive on if it's a single family in an ADU or a duplex, as long as it still fits within that same box and scale and FAR? Do we need to prescribe if it can only be a single family versus a duplex? Is there opportunity there for more flexibility for different situations? So that's just something we're exploring in this first draft and would love your feedback on.
Mel, thank you so much. And I want to give one more plug out for, if anyone wants to ask their question verbally, you can just raise your virtual hand and we'll ask you to unmute. But our next question in the Q&A is from James. And James says, it's not the topic of the day, but are there projects in the works for the money that has been collected from the parking in lieu fees?
Yeah, so the parking in lieu fees have gone towards a lot of projects of building and acquiring parking lots and things. Like if you could think back to paving the four-way, that would be an example there. But as I mentioned, the payment in lieu fee of parking is quite outdated and really not up to date with current costs of what it takes to build and maintain things. And streets projects are very expensive. So it doesn't go very far in new projects. And one thing we want to really look at with payment of lieu is, could we we look at really leveraging that if we're able to update that fee to really go towards those more communal, multimodal solutions like transit, bus stops, things like that, higher frequency transit and things, instead of putting all that time and effort into a single serving development parking versus knowing we're a really small, walkable town. Could we then leverage funding to go towards more shared multimodal projects like higher frequency of transit, for example?
Well, thank you so much. I think that's really helpful in pointing out how all these pieces are interconnected. We've got another comment coming in on parking. The comment is the photo on the screen is of the building on Fifth Street by the library, and there's not enough parking for these businesses and the town buildings. Lack of parking in town makes doing business inefficient, taking more time, which makes costs higher, and time equals money.
So I think it's a great comment. We know during certain times of year, we definitely have parking challenges in busy areas of town. And I think these zones are definitely those busy areas. So when it comes to looking at our parking requirements in our zoning code, we also really want to be really thoughtful that we're thinking about parking management then of if more people are going to be parking on street or in public parking, how can we really manage that parking to make sure it's really used efficiently and effectively? So for example, on Elk Avenue, we started enforcing 2-hour parking. So those spaces could turn over. So there could be more customer activity and availability for people trying to access businesses. And then on Maroon and Sopris, really having permits for residents and employees. So we know there's parking available for the people that actually live there and work in the area. So I know that the parking management has not been perfect and it's been a work in progress, but can we look at leveraging those sorts of tools to try to make sure the parking that we have is really efficiently used?
Thanks, Mel. I think that's another great connection between transportation and our climate and our land use and how all of this is interconnected. We've got one more question here on financial incentives. And the question is, what are the financial incentives you are considering or suggesting?
Yeah, and I can let Jesse chime in here, but that's not a program that we've developed yet. It's something that's in one of our priorities to develop next year. So we'll really be looking at and working with the council and seeing if there's outside funding sources available to say, hey, to maintain or rehabilitate your building into this use, we could provide X number of funding as a grant or as a forgivable loan or things like that, or these resources. Those are the types of things we're going to be looking at and just making sure we build a program that's really financially sustainable, but also meaningful for residents.
I think Mel said it really well. I think just working with council, trying to figure out what those programs look like. We used to have a shed rehabilitation program, but it basically just earmarked $200 for each project. And I think we budgeted $400 a year, which thinking about the cost of construction now, that isn't impactful for how much it takes to actually stabilize a structure. So thinking about these structures and how much does it take to stabilize and or maintain the buildings and being realistic about a grant program like or something like that.
Thanks, Jesse and Milne. I think that illustrates some of the work to come as this process moves forward and some of these things become better defined. We have another comment on the correlation between affordability and transportation from Mindy, thanking you for the dialogue and requesting maybe some more in-person discussion. And the link on screen as well to the community plan, I think, does a good job of drawing some of those correlations between our affordability and our quality of life with climate action and transportation. And Mel, I don't know if there's other resources you would point to that highlight that connection.
And I think we're happy to meet with you, Mindy. We'd love to chat about it more, but just more opportunities to live closer to where you work just are able to provide more choices for people. Hey, could our household have one car instead of two, or could we have no cars instead of one? And just giving the ability for more choices. And those are personal choices of where you choose to spend your money. But if you have to live far away, if you have to commute, those costs of owning a car, maintaining a car, buying gas, they can add up if transit is not accessible or feasible for you.
Thanks, Mel. And the last question we have so far relates to with the proposed unity of these three zones. Will there be up-to-date codes, regulations, and enforcement to ensure both residents and businesses thrive? For example, noise, parking, exhaust, and trespassing issues.
Yeah, so that's the goal of this whole code update is to really look at really clear, consistent regulations that are enforceable. So if you have specific things where in the past you're like, hey, this hasn't worked or this hasn't been clear, please let us know because that's really helpful to know. But at the same time, we are a small town, so we don't have a proactive enforcement currently. We don't have a code enforcement officer on our staff. We're really complaint based right now, but that is something that we can evaluate through this process too, and would love any feedback there. And Jesse, would you like to add anything?
No, Mel, I think you said it really well. Thank you, though.
Well, thank you so much. And I think this last question puts a great point on the work that's coming and the information that's available. We went through a lot of information on the current and the proposed changes in this zone. That information sheet is available at the town's website at the URL that you see here. And as follow-up to this webinar, we'll be sending a recording of the meeting, a link to that survey where you can go deeper on the questions that we asked you today, and a link to this webpage where you can find more information about the current and proposed changes in this zone.
So yeah, thank you all so much for your time today. We'll follow up with an email tomorrow sharing out the recording and the survey. And again, please reach out if you'd like to meet with us or talk with us more. It's just the beginning of the process, and we really look forward to working with you all to come up with a code that's really easy to understand and really a reflection of our community's goals and values. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Mel. I don't see any new questions coming in, so I'll just give a plug to our next webinar in the series. It's going to be 10 a.m. tomorrow. It's the Business One district, which includes Elk Avenue. The format will be very similar to today, and an opportunity to ask questions, and information will be shared out afterwards. Mel, is there anything else that folks should know about this process?
That is it for now. We really look forward to hearing your feedback.
All right. Well, we'll end a few minutes early today. Actually, we had one new question come in with a few minutes remaining. It's from Alex. And the question is, I think a code enforcement officer would be money well spent to prevent conflicts and allow you all to not get bogged down with complaints and take the burden of enforcement off of the homeowners.
Thank you for that comment, Alex. I think I really appreciate that feedback.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. And it was a well-attended webinar. We hope this was helpful. And there's going to be a lot more information on this available as we move through the process. So thanks again. And we look forward to hearing from you as this process continues.